I remember the day like it was painted in shades of gray, each moment tinged with the bitter taste of betrayal. It started as an ordinary evening, the kind where the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the living room. I had just returned from work, the weight of the day still clinging to my shoulders. The smell of her perfume lingered in the air, a familiar scent that had once brought me comfort. But now it felt like a noose tightening around my throat. I had been looking forward to a quiet night, perhaps a movie and some takeout, the kind of routine that once made me feel safe and loved. Instead, I found her phone lying face up on the kitchen counter, the screen illuminating a string of messages that shattered my world. The familiar name of a bartender, someone I had seen her laugh with on countless occasions, flashed before my eyes. My heart raced, a primal instinct warning me of the impending storm. As I read the messages, my mind spiraled. There was no mistaking the flirtation, the way words danced with unspoken desires. The laughter, the emojis, it was all there, stark and undeniable. I could almost hear the clinking of glasses, the music of the bar where she had spent so many late nights. Each message was a dagger cutting deeper into the fabric of our marriage. I felt the room close in around me, the walls pressing against my chest like a vice. Anger surged through me, hot and primal. I could feel my pulse in my ears, a deafening drumbeat of rage and betrayal. I had trusted her, believed in the sanctity of our vows, only to find them tarnished by her laughter with another man. The bartender, with his easy charm and polished smile, had become the embodiment of my worst fears. I was no longer just a husband. I was a man whose heart had been ripped from his chest and stomped on the ground. I confronted her that night, the air thick with tension. When she walked in, oblivious to the storm brewing within me, I could barely contain my emotions. I stood there, a silent sentinel of pain, until I could no longer hold back the words that clawed at my throat. "Who is he?" I demanded, my voice a low growl that echoed in the silence of our home. Her eyes widened, confusion morphing into realization. The truth hung between us, heavy and suffocating. "Mark, it's not what you think," she stammered, but I could see the guilt etched on her face. I pressed on, the floodgates of emotion bursting open. "Not what I think. I have the messages, Sarah. You think I wouldn't know. You think I wouldn't see how you look at him." Her silence screamed louder than any words could convey. I felt my heart splinter, the cracks deepening with each passing second. The betrayal was not just in her actions, but in the way she tried to minimize it, as if our love meant so little that she could brush it aside with empty words. In that moment, I realized I was standing on the precipice of something dark and twisted. The anger that coursed through me was intoxicating, a bitter elixir that promised revenge. I wanted to make her feel the same pain she had inflicted upon me. I wanted to ensure that the bartender, this man who had stolen my wife's laughter, would never serve her again. But first, I needed to gather my thoughts. I needed to understand the depths of my own anguish before I could plot my course of revenge. As I stared into her eyes, I saw a flicker of fear, but it was too late for tears. I had already stepped into the shadows of betrayal, and I was determined to drag everyone down with me. Before the betrayal, Sarah and I had built a life together that many would envy. We met in college, two idealistic souls drawn together by a shared love for literature and late-night coffee runs. Our first date was a whirlwind of laughter and conversation, a night where the world outside faded away. I can still recall how her eyes sparkled with mischief when she spoke about her dreams, how we both vowed to support each other no matter what life threw our way. We married 3 years later, a small ceremony surrounded by close friends and family. The vows we exchanged felt like a promise carved in stone. I remember the way her hand felt in mine, warm and reassuring, as we pledged to love each other through thick and thin. For a long time, we were happy, navigating the ups and downs of life together. Our little apartment was filled with the echoes of shared laughter, late-night debates over dinner, and quiet moments spent in each other's arms. But as the years passed, life began to wear down the edges of our once vibrant relationship. The honeymoon phase faded, replaced by the grind of everyday responsibilities. Work became a relentless cycle of deadlines and meetings, and I found myself consumed by my job. Sarah, too, was caught in the whirlwind of her career, often spending late nights at the office. We tried to keep the spark alive, scheduling date nights and weekend getaways, but it felt like we were merely going through the motions. Looking back, I can see the signs of her discontent, the subtle shifts in her demeanor. There were nights when she would come home late, her eyes a little too bright, her laughter a little too loud. At first, I brushed it off as the stress of work, a way for her to unwind after a long day. But now I think about those moments with a bitter taste in my mouth. Then there was the bar, the place where she and her friends would often hang out after work. I never thought much of it at the time. It was a popular spot, a place filled with laughter and music, a haven for young professionals seeking an escape from their daily grind. I had even encouraged her to go, believing it was healthy for her to have a social life outside of our marriage. But now, I realized that the very place I thought was harmless had become the breeding ground for her infidelity. Mark, the bartender, was charming and confident. He had that magnetic quality that drew people in, and Sarah was no exception. I could picture him behind the bar, pouring drinks, flashing that disarming smile that had probably captivated so many before her. I had always trusted her, but now I see how easy it was for him to slip into the cracks of our relationship. As I replay these memories in my mind, I feel a mix of sadness and anger. How could I have been so blind? I had devoted myself to her, yet I allowed our connection to fray at the edges. I had been so focused on my own career that I failed to notice her growing discontent. The late nights, the laughter at the bar, they were all signs I had ignored. Now, standing in the aftermath of her betrayal, I felt a storm brewing within me. I could no longer dwell on the past. I needed to focus on the present and the revenge that was slowly taking shape in my mind. I would not let the bartender get away with stealing my wife's affection. He would pay for the pain he had caused, and I would make sure of it. The darkness within me began to solidify into a plan, one that would unfold like a carefully crafted story. I could feel the bitterness coiling around my heart, a bitter reminder of the love I had once cherished. I would ensure that Sarah never looked at him again, that she would never feel the warmth of his charm. The wheels were in motion, and I was ready to embrace the shadows of my own making. The night after I discovered the messages, the air in our home was charged with an electric tension, a palpable silence that hummed between us. I had barely slept, my mind racing through memories and fantasies of retribution. Sarah had returned from work, her demeanor a delicate mix of defiance and fear. I could see it in her eyes. She knew I had found out, and she was bracing herself for the inevitable confrontation. As she stepped through the door, I was seated at the kitchen table, the dim light casting long shadows across my face. I looked up at her, and for a moment I felt a flicker of the love I once had for her, quickly extinguished by the reality of her betrayal. I had spent the entire day rehearsing what I wanted to say, but now, as I saw her standing there, I felt the words catch in my throat. "Mark," I said, my voice steady but low, "we need to talk." Her expression shifted, a mixture of shock and resignation as she took a seat across from me. "Is this about the messages?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Of course it is," I replied, frustration boiling just beneath the surface. "You thought I wouldn't find out. You thought I wouldn't notice how you've been acting." She looked away, her gaze dropping to the table, and I could see the guilt etched in her features. "It was a mistake, a moment of weakness," she said, attempting to grasp at the threads of justification. "A mistake," I echoed, incredulous. "You don't just accidentally send flirty messages to someone. That's a choice, Sarah. You chose to betray me." "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she pleaded, her voice cracking. "I was unhappy and I thought it was just harmless fun. It didn't mean anything. Didn't mean anything." The words exploded from my mouth, and the anger I had been holding back surged to the forefront. "You think flirting with a bartender while we're married is harmless. You have no idea how much this hurts." I could see her eyes welling with tears, and for a moment I felt a pang of sympathy, but it was quickly overshadowed by the rage that consumed me. "What were you looking for, Sarah? Did you think I wouldn't care? Did you think I wouldn't notice?" "I just wanted to feel alive again," she confessed, her voice trembling. "Things had become so routine, so boring. I thought I could find some excitement, just for a moment." Her words hung in the air like a bitter fog, and I struggled to process the depth of her betrayal. I had given her my heart, my trust, and she had tossed it aside for a fleeting thrill. It felt like a knife twisting deeper with each revelation. Excitement, is that what you call it? I shook my head, disbelief coursing through me. You didn't think about what this would do to me. You didn't think about us. I'm sorry, she said, her voice barely above a whisper now. I didn't mean for it to happen. I love you, I really do. Love. The word felt empty, devoid of the warmth it once held. If you loved me, you wouldn't have done this, I shot back, the bitterness spilling from my lips. You wouldn't have let some bartender fill the void you felt in our marriage. You wouldn't have laughed with him, shared your secrets, or sent those messages. The tears rolled down her cheeks, and for a moment I felt a flicker of compassion. But then I remembered the betrayal, the laughter I had imagined echoing in the bar, and the warmth of her affection directed at another man. That compassion quickly turned to resolve. I don't think I can ever forgive you for this, I said, my voice cold and steady. You've shattered everything we built together. She reached across the table, her hand trembling as she tried to grasp mine. Please don't say that, we can work through this. I'll do anything to make it right. I pulled my hand away, the distance between us now a chasm that I wasn't sure could ever be bridged. You've made your choice, Sarah. You chose him over us. I need time to think. The room felt suffocating, the silence stretching between us like a taut wire ready to snap. I stood up, the chair scraping against the floor like a warning bell. I need to figure out what I want, and right now, I know I want revenge. Her eyes widened in alarm, and I could see the realization dawning on her. She had underestimated the depth of my pain, the darkness that was beginning to take root within me. As I walked away from the table, I felt a sense of clarity. The confrontation had ignited something within me, a burning desire to make her understand the weight of her choices. The bartender would pay for the laughter he had stolen from me, and I would ensure that Sarah would never look at him the same way again. I didn't know exactly how I would execute my plan, but I was determined. The darkness was calling, and I was ready to answer. The anger that coursed through my veins was intoxicating, a bitter fuel that ignited my resolve. I had always prided myself on being rational, a steady presence in the chaos of life, but now I felt the primal urge for revenge clawing at my insides. I was determined to make the bartender pay for the pain he had inflicted upon me, and I began to craft a plan, one that would ensure he would never serve Sarah again. I started by observing Mark from a distance. I went to the bar where he worked, initially under the guise of being just another patron. I watched him interact with customers, his charm spilling over like the drinks he poured. He had an easy way about him, a magnetic pull that drew people in. I could see why Sarah had fallen for him, but beneath that charm was a man who had crossed a line he shouldn't have, and I was going to make sure he understood the consequences of his actions. I frequented the bar more often, pretending to enjoy the atmosphere while all the while plotting my next move. I began to gather information, talking to other bartenders, eavesdropping on conversations, and piecing together the fragments of his life. I learned about his weaknesses, his vices. It wasn't long before I discovered that Mark had a penchant for gambling, a habit that often left him in debt. The more I learned, the more the pieces of my plan fell into place. I decided to exploit his weaknesses, to turn his own vices against him. I approached a few acquaintances who frequented the bar, people who had their own grudges against Mark for various reasons. I whispered tales of his gambling debts, painting him as a reckless player who couldn't keep his life in order. The whispers spread like wildfire, and soon enough, I had a small group of people who were all too eager to help me bring him down. I crafted a story, one that outlined his gambling addiction, his inability to pay his debts, and how he had been skimming from the bar's tip jar to fuel his habit. I planted seeds of doubt among the staff, ensuring that they would keep an eye on him, questioning his integrity. I wanted to create a rift between him and the bar owners, to make them see him as a liability rather than an asset. As I executed my plan, I felt a twisted sense of satisfaction. Each small victory fueled my desire for revenge. I could see the way Mark's confidence began to waver, the way his smile faltered as he sensed the growing distrust around him. It was intoxicating to watch him squirm, knowing that I was the architect of his downfall. But it wasn't just about Mark. I wanted Sarah to feel the weight of her choices, to understand the consequences of her betrayal. I made sure she was still going to the bar, still laughing with friends, unaware of the storm brewing beneath the surface. I wanted her to see the man she had chosen over me crumble, to watch as the charm he had once wielded so effortlessly began to fade. As the weeks passed, the tension in the bar grew palpable. The staff began to distance themselves from Mark, whispering behind closed doors, casting wary glances his way. I could see the toll it was taking on him. His laughter turned hollow, his smile strained. I knew I was getting to him, and it felt good. One night I decided to confront him directly. I walked into the bar, a sense of purpose driving my steps. I approached him as he was mixing a drink, his hands trembling slightly. He looked up, surprise etched across his face. "What do you want?" he asked, a hint of defensiveness creeping into his tone. "I just wanted to check in on you," I said with a feigned smile. "I've heard some interesting things about you lately." His eyes narrowed, suspicion flickering in his gaze. "What are you talking about?" "Word travels fast in this town," I continued, leaning in closer, my voice low and conspiratorial. "People are starting to wonder about your gambling habits. It's not looking good for you, Mark. You might want to be careful." His expression shifted from surprise to anger, and I could see the tension in his jaw. "You don't know what you're talking about," he snapped, but I could sense the underlying fear in his voice. "Oh, I think I do," I replied, enjoying the moment. "You've been careless, haven't you? You've let your vices take control, and now everyone is starting to notice." I watched as his face paled, the realization of his precarious situation settling in. I leaned back, satisfied with the chaos I was sowing. "Just a friendly piece of advice, Mark. You might want to clean up your act before it's too late." As I turned to leave, I could hear him mumble under his breath, frustration and anger boiling just beneath the surface. I walked out of the bar, feeling a sense of triumph wash over me. I was orchestrating his downfall, and with each passing day, it felt more and more like justice. But deep down, I knew this wasn't just about Mark. It was about Sarah, too. I wanted her to see the results of her choices, to understand the depth of the betrayal I had been forced to endure. The bitter taste of revenge was intoxicating, and I found myself slipping deeper into the shadows, consumed by the darkness that had become my new reality. And yet, as I reveled in my plan, a small voice in the back of my mind whispered doubts. Was this truly the path I wanted to take? Would revenge fill the void she had created, or would it only lead to more pain? But for now, those questions were drowned out by the sweet satisfaction of watching the man who had stolen my wife's laughter begin to unravel. As the days turned into weeks, I found myself caught in a whirlwind of emotions. The thrill of revenge consumed me, but beneath the surface, I felt an unsettling emptiness. I had meticulously orchestrated Mark's downfall, and yet, each small victory left me feeling more hollow than the last. The bitterness of my actions seeped into my bones, and I began to question the morality of my choices. I watched as Mark's confidence crumbled, his charm fading as whispers of his gambling habits spread like wildfire. He became a shadow of the man I had seen laughing with my wife, his smile replaced by a grimace of defeat. I reveled in the chaos I had sown, but with each passing day, I felt a gnawing sense of guilt creeping in. Was this truly what I wanted? To bring another man to his knees simply because he had stolen my wife's affection? I began to spend my evenings in solitude, replaying the events in my mind, wrestling with the consequences of my actions. I thought of Sarah, how she had once been my partner, my confidant. I had loved her with every fiber of my being, and yet here I was, plotting revenge against a man who had taken advantage of her moment of weakness. Was I any better than him? One evening, as I sat in our dimly lit living room, I found myself staring at the photographs that adorned our walls. The memories captured in those frames felt like a cruel reminder of what I had lost. There was a picture of us on our wedding day, beaming with joy, surrounded by friends and family. It was a moment frozen in time, a testament to the love we had shared. But now it felt tainted, overshadowed by betrayal and bitterness. I picked up the frame, my fingers tracing the outline of her face. I remembered the way she had looked at me that day, the promise of forever shining in her eyes. How could she have thrown that away? How could she have laughed with another man when we had vowed to stand by each other through thick and thin? The anger bubbled up inside me again, but this time it was accompanied by a deep sense of sorrow. I found myself questioning everything about our relationship. Had I failed her? Had I been so absorbed in my own life that I hadn't seen the cracks forming beneath the surface? I had pushed her away, allowed the monotony of life to dull our connection. But did that justify her choice to seek comfort in another man's arms? I thought about the moments we had shared, the intimacy that had once ignited our passion. I remembered the late-night conversations, the shared dreams, the laughter that had filled our home. It felt like a lifetime ago, a distant memory overshadowed by the pain of betrayal. I had been so consumed by my need for revenge that I had lost sight of the love we had built together. As I sat there, the weight of my actions pressed down on me like a heavy shroud. I had become a man, driven by darkness, consumed by the desire for vengeance. But what would that accomplish? Would it heal the wounds she had inflicted? Would it bring back the love we had shared? Or would it only deepen the chasm between us, pushing us further apart? I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath as I tried to steady my racing thoughts. I realized that I was at a crossroads, a moment where I had to decide the path I wanted to take. I could continue down this dark road of revenge, allowing it to consume me, or I could choose to confront Sarah, to seek understanding and healing rather than destruction. I felt a flicker of hope within me, a desire to reclaim the love that had once defined my life. Perhaps it wasn't too late to salvage what we had. Perhaps we could find a way to rebuild our relationship, to confront the pain and betrayal together. But that would require vulnerability, a willingness to face the truth of her actions and my own shortcomings. With renewed determination, I made a decision. I wouldn't let revenge dictate my life any longer. I would confront Sarah, not with anger but with honesty. I would seek to understand why she had turned to Mark, and in doing so, I hoped to find a way to heal the wounds that had festered between us. As I stood up, the photographs lining the walls felt less like reminders of betrayal and more like a call to action. I would fight for our love, even in the face of betrayal. I would confront Sarah, not just as a husband seeking revenge, but as a man who still believed in the possibility of redemption. The bitterness that had consumed me began to dissipate, replaced by a flicker of hope. It was time to take the first step toward healing, to face the woman I loved and the choices we had both made. It wouldn't be easy, but I was ready to confront the truth, no matter how painful it might be. The following day, I found myself standing in front of the mirror, the reflection staring back at me, a stranger, one marked by anger, betrayal, and a thirst for revenge. But beneath the hardened exterior lay a man who still believed in love, a man who wanted to reclaim the life he had built with Sarah. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the conversation that was about to unfold. When Sarah came home that evening, I could sense the tension in the air. She walked in, her eyes darting around the living room as if searching for signs of what I had been up to. I knew she could feel the weight of my resolve, the air thick with unspoken words. We stood there for a moment, the silence stretching between us, and I could see the uncertainty in her eyes. "Mark," she said, her voice tentative, "we need to talk." I nodded, gesturing for her to sit. "Yes, we do, but I want you to listen to me first." Her brow furrowed, and she took a seat slowly, her body language tense. I could see the apprehension in her posture, the way she braced herself for what was to come. I needed to be honest, to lay bare the truth of my feelings and the turmoil that had consumed me since the day I discovered her betrayal. "Sarah," I began, my voice steady but filled with emotion, "I've spent the last few weeks consumed by anger and revenge. I wanted to hurt Mark the way he hurt me, to make him pay for what he did. But as I watched him unravel, I realized that it wasn't going to heal the wounds between us. It was only pushing us further apart." She looked at me, her eyes wide with surprise, as if she hadn't expected this turn in the conversation. "Mark, let me finish." I interrupted gently, my heart racing. I want to understand why you turned to him. I need to know what was missing in our relationship that made you seek comfort elsewhere. I want to confront this together, not with anger but with honesty. Tears welled in her eyes, and for a moment I feared she would retreat into defensiveness. But instead, she nodded slowly, her expression shifting from fear to vulnerability. "I've been so scared to talk about it," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I thought you would hate me for what I did." "I do hate what you did, Sarah," I replied, my heart heavy with the truth. "But I don't hate you. I love you and I want to understand. We can't move forward if we don't confront this together." She took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly as she spoke. "I felt lost, Mark. I thought we were drifting apart and I didn't know how to reach out to you. I thought I could find excitement, something to fill the void, but I was wrong. I see that now." Her admission hung in the air, a fragile thread connecting us as we faced the reality of our relationship. "I should have talked to you," she continued, her voice breaking. "I should have been honest about how I felt instead of seeking comfort in someone else. I never wanted to hurt you." "I know," I said softly, my heart aching for the pain we had both endured. "But we have to find a way to reconnect, to rebuild what we lost. I want to fight for us, for the love we once had, but it has to be a two-way street." She nodded, tears rolling down her cheeks. "I want that too, Mark. I want to make this right, to earn your trust back. I don't want to lose you." The vulnerability in her voice struck a chord. Deep within me, I realized that the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but I was willing to take that journey. I had spent too long wallowing in darkness, and now I wanted to step into the light to reclaim the love we had shared. "I'm willing to work on this," I said, my voice filled with determination. "But it will take time. We need to be open and honest with each other, even when it's hard." She reached across the table, her hand finding mine. "I promise to be honest, Mark. I'll do whatever it takes to rebuild our relationship." In that moment, I felt a flicker of hope ignite within me. The bitterness that had consumed me began to fade, replaced by a renewed sense of purpose. We had both made mistakes, but we were still standing together, ready to confront the truth and work toward healing. As we talked late into the night, sharing our fears and hopes, I realized that love is not just about the good times. It's about facing the storms together. We would have to navigate the aftermath of betrayal, but I believed we could emerge stronger on the other side. The bartender had stolen laughter, but he hadn't stolen our love. It was still there, buried beneath the pain, waiting to be uncovered. Together, we would reclaim it, forging a new path built on honesty, vulnerability, and the promise of a better future. As the dawn broke on a new day, I felt a sense of peace settle within me. The darkness that had threatened to consume me had been replaced by a flicker of light, a reminder that even in the face of betrayal, love could still find a way to heal and thrive. And with that, I knew that our journey was just beginning.